Imagine this. A great philosopher, a man revered for his wisdom, is left speechless by someone society deems less than him. A slave. Yes, a slave. Not just any philosopher either. We're talking about Epictetus, one of the most renowned Stoics in history. And here's the kicker. It wasn't his lofty ideas or his moral superiority that triumphed in this moment. It was a lesson in humility, a revelation so raw it cut deeper than any lecture ever could. So, let me ask you, what happens when the teacher becomes the student? What does it say about the human condition when the one wielding the chains has something profound to teach the one writing about freedom? This isn't the story you think it is. It's not neat or comfortable. It's messy, human, and deeply, deeply unsettling. Epictetus's life begins not as a philosopher but as a slave, property. He wasn't born into privilege or given the luxury of contemplating life's deeper meanings in a marble-clad Roman villa. No, his first lessons in Stoicism came from pain, humiliation, and a kind of suffering most of us can barely comprehend. Imagine a man whose very body was a testament to cruelty. His leg, twisted and broken by the hands of his own master, became a physical symbol of his subjugation. And yet, when that moment came, when the master tightened his grip and pain surged through his bones, Epictetus didn't scream, didn't curse. He simply stated the obvious: if you continue, you will break my leg. And when the snap came, his only response was, I told you so. Now stop and think about that. How would you react? Most of us would plead, cry out, or burn with rage. But Epictetus's reaction wasn't just unusual, it was revolutionary. He was showing that even in the face of utter powerlessness, there is one thing no one, not even a tyrant, can take from you: your mind. This is the stage where the story unfolds, a world that worshipped power, wealth, and dominance. And yet here was a man stripped of all worldly status, proving that freedom isn't about what's outside of you. It's about what's within. But here's the irony. Even as Epictetus climbed from the status of a slave to a revered philosopher, even as he became a beacon of Stoic wisdom, life wasn't done teaching him. And it wasn't an emperor or a scholar who would deliver his next great lesson. It was a slave. The moment that changes everything. Picture this. Epictetus, no longer bound by chains, has become a free man. Not just free in body but free in spirit, or so he thought. He's teaching, surrounded by students eager to drink in his wisdom, speaking about virtue, fate, and freedom. His words carry weight, the kind that echoes through the halls of history. And then, in the midst of this intellectual grandeur, a voice cuts through the air. A slave, standing at the edge of the gathering, asks a question. If freedom is truly about the mind, not the body, why do you still live as though others have power over you? It's a dagger disguised as a question. A challenge so simple, so direct, that it pierces the armor of even the greatest thinker. Can you imagine the silence in that room? The students, looking to their master for a swift and profound answer, instead see him pause. Because the question wasn't rhetorical. It was real. It wasn't just about philosophy, it was about him. And this is where the stage is truly set, not for a lecture but for a confrontation. Not between Epictetus and the slave, but between Epictetus and himself. A stage for us all. This isn't just ancient history. This moment, this clash between ideals and reality, is something we all face. How often do we preach values we struggle to live up to? How often do we claim freedom while staying enslaved to our fears, our egos, our need for approval? Epictetus's story isn't just his. It's ours. Because no matter how much we think we figured out, life has a way of humbling us, doesn't it? It throws questions at us that we can't answer immediately, forces us to confront the gaps between who we are and who we want to be. And in this story, the slave isn't just a character. He's a symbol of that moment of reckoning, a reminder that truth doesn't come neatly wrapped. It comes when we least expect it, from the places we least expect it. So here we stand at the beginning of a journey. A journey not just into the life of a philosopher but into the contradictions that define us all. Epictetus thought he understood freedom. But in this moment, as the stage is set, we see that his greatest lessons were yet to come. Let's go back to that moment, the slave's question hanging in the air like smoke from a smoldering fire. If freedom is truly about the mind, not the body, why do you still live as though others have power over you? This wasn't just a question. It was a mirror held up in front of Epictetus and his philosophy. And for a man whose entire life was built around the idea that freedom is internal, not external, it was devastating. But let's pause for a second. What does that question really mean? Let me ask you something. How often do you tell yourself you're free, that you're in control, while quietly bending to the expectations of others? How often do you act as though you're immune to judgment, only to feel the sting of a passing glance, a dismissive comment, or a like that never came. We all do it. And that's the point. When the slave asked his question, he wasn't just challenging Epictetus. He was challenging the entire foundation of Stoicism. He was asking, is it enough to say the mind is free if the world around you still holds the chains? And the beauty of it, what makes this moment so universal, is that Epictetus didn't have an immediate answer. Because here's the thing, Stoicism teaches that external events are beyond our control, that true power comes from mastering our perceptions, desires, and emotions. But what happens when the external world doesn't just challenge you, it reflects your own hypocrisy? The philosopher's dilemma. Imagine the scene. Epictetus, the revered teacher, pauses mid-lesson. His students lean in, waiting for the perfect retort, the wisdom they've come to expect. And yet, nothing comes. Why? Because deep down, Epictetus knew the truth. He had spent years preaching about the indomitable human spirit, about how no one could take your freedom unless you gave it away. But this question wasn't about abstract philosophy. It was personal. The slave's words were like a blade cutting through the layers of logic and rhetoric, exposing the raw vulnerability beneath. And isn't that what happens to all of us when we're confronted with a truth we're not ready to face? When someone or something holds a mirror up to our carefully constructed identity and shows us the cracks. Epictetus's teachings were built on the idea of inner resilience. But in this moment, he had to confront a reality he hadn't fully acknowledged. Freedom of the mind is a practice, not a destination. And sometimes, even the most enlightened among us stumble on the path. The question behind the question. Let's dig deeper into what the slave was really asking. It wasn't just, are you truly free? It was, what does freedom even mean? Think about that for a second. Freedom. We toss that word around as if it's self-explanatory, but is it? Is freedom the absence of physical chains? Or is it the ability to think, feel, and act without being dictated by fear, ego, or desire? And here's the kicker. What if it's both? What if the mind and the body aren't as separate as we like to think? This is the paradox that Epictetus had to wrestle with. As a former slave, he knew what it meant to be physically bound. But as a philosopher, he had dedicated his life to proving that true freedom transcends the physical. And yet, the slave's question lingered, like a splinter in his thoughts. Because the truth is, even the wisest among us are still human. Even the most disciplined minds are shaped by the world around them. Why this matters to you? Now let me ask you, how free are you? Before you answer, consider this. You might not be shackled by physical chains, but what about the invisible ones? The fear of failure, the need for validation, the expectations of a society that measures worth in likes, followers, and paychecks. The slave's question wasn't just for Epictetus. It's for all of us. It's a challenge to look beyond the surface, to question not just our circumstances but our perceptions of those circumstances. Are you truly free, or have you simply convinced yourself you are? This is the philosopher's dilemma, and it's one that we all share. Because the journey toward true freedom, freedom of the mind, the spirit, the soul, isn't about reaching some ultimate state of enlightenment. It's about the struggle, the questioning, the willingness to confront the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. And in that struggle, in that questioning, lies the very essence of what it means to be human. Now, here's where the story takes a sharp, unexpected turn. The slave's question wasn't just a passing challenge. It wasn't just philosophical banter or an abstract debate about freedom. No, it became something far more personal, a public reckoning for Epictetus. Imagine this, a room filled with eager students hanging on every word of their revered teacher. Epictetus, the Stoic master, known for his calm demeanor and unshakable wisdom, standing there in silence as the weight of the slave's question presses down on him. His students shift uncomfortably. The air feels heavy. And then a chuckle, soft at first, then louder. It's the slave laughing. Not out of malice but out of disbelief. Because here was the great Epictetus, the philosopher who had risen from slavery, standing powerless in the face of his own doctrine. The slave's laughter wasn't just a reaction, it was an indictment. "Teacher," the slave said with a smirk that cut like a knife, "you preach freedom, but you live like the rest of us, bound by pride, by appearances, by the need to be seen as wise." And just like that, the balance of power in the room shifted. The students, once wide-eyed in reverence, now looked between Epictetus and the slave, questioning everything they thought they knew. This wasn't just a humiliation, it was an unraveling. The Stoic mask cracks. Here's where it gets even more fascinating. The humiliation didn't come from the slave's words alone. It came from the truth behind them. You see, Epictetus had built his philosophy on the idea that external circumstances, Poverty, slavery, even physical pain don't determine your freedom. Your mind does. And yet, here he was visibly shaken, not by chains or suffering, but by a simple question. And let's be honest, isn't that the way it always goes? It's not the big, dramatic moments that break us. It's the quiet truths we've been avoiding. The small, piercing questions that cut through our defenses and leave us exposed. This was Epictetus's moment of reckoning. His philosophy demanded that he remain unperturbed, but his humanity betrayed him. And that's the paradox of being human, isn't it? We strive for ideals, for principles, for unshakable strength, but in the end, we're creatures of emotion, of ego, of vulnerability. And that's not a weakness. It's a reality. The slave's role in the lesson. But here's the twist. The slave wasn't trying to destroy Epictetus. He was teaching him. In his own way, the slave was embodying the very principles of Stoicism. He didn't bow to Epictetus's authority or reputation. He wasn't intimidated by the philosopher's status or his teachings. Instead, he questioned, he challenged, he provoked. And isn't that what true freedom looks like? The courage to question even the most revered ideas? The willingness to confront even the most powerful figures, not out of disrespect, but out of a deep commitment to the truth? The slave's laughter, his words, his audacity, they were a reminder that philosophy isn't about perfection. It's about practice. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being brave enough to face the questions. The mirror turned to us. But let me ask you something. If you were in that room watching Epictetus falter, what would you feel? Would you feel a sense of vindication, seeing the great philosopher humbled? Or would you feel uncomfortable, knowing that his struggle is your struggle too? Because let's not kid ourselves. We all wear masks. We all have principles we claim to live by, only to stumble when those principles are tested. How often do you tell yourself you're calm, only to lose your temper over something trivial? How often do you promise yourself you'll be brave, only to back down when fear takes hold? Epictetus's humiliation wasn't just his own. It was ours. It was a reminder that no matter how much we learn, no matter how much we grow, we're all still works in progress. But here's the thing, that's not a failure. It's a gift. Because every crack in the mask, every moment of vulnerability, is an opportunity to grow, to learn, to become more aligned with the truth of who we are and who we want to be. And that's what makes this story so powerful. It's not about a philosopher being humiliated. It's about a philosopher being human. And in that humanity, finding the strength to keep striving, keep questioning, and keep teaching. So, the question isn't, what would you have done in Epictetus's place? The question is, what will you do the next time your principles are tested? Will you hide behind your mask, or will you embrace the cracks and let the light in? What happened after that fateful confrontation? Did Epictetus retaliate, asserting his authority to save face? Did he dismiss the slave, reduce him to silence, and restore the fragile order of the room? No. Epictetus, true to his teachings, despite his faltering in that moment, did something extraordinary. He listened. He absorbed the lesson even though it stung. Humility in the face of truth. Think about how rare this is. A person in power, humbled publicly, chooses not to lash out but to reflect. That moment of humiliation, where Epictetus stood exposed, wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. He later spoke of the incident, not as a moment of shame but as a profound teaching. If you wish to improve, he would say, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. What a statement, right? To improve, we must first accept that we're imperfect, that we don't have it all figured out, and that sometimes, wisdom comes from the least expected places. And this is where the real brilliance of Stoicism shines. It doesn't promise invincibility. It doesn't suggest you'll never be hurt, humiliated, or betrayed. What it does promise is that every experience, no matter how painful, can be a lesson, a step closer to inner freedom. What does it mean to be truly free? Let's linger on that idea for a moment. Freedom. It's a word we throw around so often that it's lost some of its weight. But what does it really mean to be free? Is it financial independence? Is it having power or status? Or is it something deeper, something less tangible but infinitely more valuable? For Epictetus, freedom wasn't about circumstances. After all, he began life as a slave. His philosophy wasn't born in luxury but in chains. And yet, even after gaining his physical freedom, he knew that true liberation didn't come from external conditions. True freedom, he taught, is the ability to control your mind, your reactions, your perceptions. It's the power to remain unshaken even when the world around you crumbles. But here's the catch. The path to that freedom isn't smooth. It's messy, full of contradictions and uncomfortable truths. It requires facing yourself in the mirror, not just on your best days but on your worst. The confrontation with the slave forced Epictetus to do just that, to acknowledge that even the wisest among us are bound by ego, by pride, by the very human fear of looking foolish. And in doing so, he grew, not in spite of his humiliation but because of it. The slave's legacy. Here's what's fascinating. The slave, nameless and forgotten by history, became one of Epictetus's greatest teachers. Not by offering philosophical arguments or grand insights, but by holding up a mirror to his master's flaws. And isn't that true for all of us? Our greatest lessons often come from the people we least expect. From a child's innocent question that pierces our pretense. From a stranger's criticism that forces us to reevaluate. From moments of vulnerability that we'd rather forget but can't afford to ignore. The slave's challenge wasn't just a lesson for Epictetus. It's a lesson for all of us. It's a reminder that wisdom doesn't always come from the top down. Sometimes it comes from the margins, from the voices we dismiss or overlook, the choice we all face. So here's the big question. What do you do when life holds up a mirror to your flaws? Do you turn away, refusing to confront the truth? Do you lash out, blaming others for your discomfort? Or do you lean in, as Epictetus eventually did, and let the experience transform you? Because here's the truth, we all face moments like this. Moments when our principles are tested, our egos are bruised, and our vulnerabilities are laid bare. And in those moments we have a choice. We can cling to our masks, pretending we have it all figured out. Or we can embrace the cracks and let them guide us toward growth. Epictetus' story isn't just a tale of humiliation and redemption. It's a call to action. A reminder that the path to true freedom isn't about avoiding discomfort. It's about embracing it. The eternal question. As the dust settled after the confrontation, one question lingered in the air. It's the same question that has lingered through the centuries, echoing in the teachings of every great philosopher, from Socrates to Seneca to Epictetus himself. What does it mean to live a good life? And maybe, just maybe, the answer isn't in grand achievements or unshakable principles. Maybe it's in the willingness to face our imperfections, to learn from every challenge, every failure, every moment of humiliation. So I'll leave you with this. When your principles are tested, when life challenges your deepest beliefs, will you retreat? Or will you, like Epictetus, find the courage to grow, not in spite of the pain but because of it? The choice is yours. But remember, true freedom isn't about being unshaken. It's about learning to stand tall even when the ground beneath you shifts.